Linda Adams, and I arrange for these history talks. Welcome to our second history talk of 2024. As you know, our very special guest speaker today will be a blacksmith from Old Kernville named T.J. Gilbert. And he's been seen around here this morning, but before he appears, I'm going to make announcements for our museum's upcoming events. We have 4 or 5 events coming up in April. First, on Tuesday, April 16th, for those people who are docents and volunteers, we'll be having a payday barbecue. The joke around the museum is all of us volunteers who run the museum all get paid the same. Lots of zeros. So this is our payday barbecue on Tuesday, April 16th from 10 to 12. The next event in April will be our movie Under the Stars, and that will be right here at 7:30 on Saturday, April 20th. And that is going to be Roll on Texas Moon. Let me find any information about that. With Roy Rogers and our expert Ron Anderson, who presents the movies and the information about where in the local area they were filmed, says that this is probably one of Roy Rogers' best movies. So Roll on Texas Moon on Saturday, April 20th at 7:30 right here. Our next event will be on Tuesday, April 23rd in the evening at the Senior Center in Lake Isabella. That will be a speaker from the Tabatalabo tribe, their chairman, Robert Gomez. So that's on Tuesday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. Then on Saturday, April 27th, there are 2 museum events going on. The first one is Havilah Days over in the first Kern County seat of Havilah, and that will be the mining exposition all-day event there from 10 till 3:30. Beautiful sight, especially this time of year in the spring over there, and a pretty drive. I always feel like when we drive over Bogfish Saddle down into the Havilah area, like we're stepping back in time. So it's a great place for history. That same day here at the museum at the annex across the street, Jack Reynolds, one of our volunteers and docents, will be doing a demonstration of his bonsais. He has been culturing bonsai plants for decades. As I recall, Jack had been a botany or biology professor before he retired. Anyway, that will be both Saturday, April 27th and Sunday, April 28th over in the annex across the street. He'll be doing demonstrations at 1 p.m. each day, but his show will be there for the 2 days. Then the last announcement is looking ahead at May. Saturday, May 18th is History Days, and that will be a big event with all kinds of things going on. The mule packers will be here, Native American artists, and many other things. And that will be here on Saturday, May 18th, so put that on your calendars. Well, I'm expecting T.J. Gilbert to show up most any time now, so we'll see what happens next.
Lordy! A fella steps away for a moment and half the Kernville appears. Certainly hope you aren't all expecting me to do blacksmithing work for you. You know, blacksmithing is rough work, especially for an old codger like myself. Mine's a good-looking codger. I be lover, a good-looking codger, but an old codger nonetheless. If you allow me, I'll set a spell and introduce myself. I'm T.J. Gilbert, Thomas John Gilbert. But most people hereabouts call me Thomas Jack. I believe that's because I'm a cousin Jack. Now, I don't rightly know where that term's come from, but us cousin Jacks are miners who come from Cornwall, England, to work the mines here in America. I was born in Cornwall in 1849, and my pa, that's Thomas Gilbert also, though most people call him Tussie. He brought me to California in the late 1860s. And by 1872, we were both working up at the Cerro Gordo mines there east of Lone Pine. I was blacksmithing. Well, that is until March 26th of 1872. That's when we thought the earth was going to open up and swallow us whole. That earthquake sounded like a steam locomotive barreling through the middle of that mountain. Took down several buildings up at the mine and killed a man. But the worst of it was down in Lone Pine. They lost 52 of their 59 buildings and 27 people were killed. I'm told that quake was just as bad or worse than the one they had up in San Francisco a few years back in 1906. There were cracks in the ground in the Owens Valley miles long, a few of them up to 150 foot wide. I'm even told that quake stopped clocks all the way down in San Diego. Well, Pa and I decided to leave the Cerro Gordo after that. Came on over here to the Kern River mines, and both got hired on up at the Big Blue. The Big Blue mine there, just to the northwest of where the cemetery is there by the river. I was blacksmithing. Back in those days, the Big Blue was a mighty large operation. They had some 200 cousin Jacks working down in the mill and in the mine also. And then not long after we arrived, they installed an 80 stamp mill at that mine. An 80 stamp mill, Lordy, the racket that thing put up, you could hear it for miles around. Well, eventually I left the Big Blue, but continued blacksmithing at other mines. I worked up at the Bright Star mine there in the Paiutes here in the mountains to the south of us. Also worked at the Botten mine there in Havilah. Now, Havilah is where I also met my beautiful wife Marie. It was back in 1880, and I'd gone to a dance one Saturday night, and I spied me the most beautiful, blonde, slight 20-year-old gal you have ever seen. Her name was Marie Renee. Her mother had brought her from Germany a few years back, and well, I knew right then I was going to marry that gal. Sure enough, within the year we were married, right there in Havilah by justice of the peace bill. About a year after that, we welcomed our first child into this world, a beautiful little girl. We named her Estelle. We call her Stella. She was a bright little thing. She still is. Also, a blacksmith up at the Harley mine, there at the top of Mineral Mountain here, just to the north of us here. I hear some of you folks call it Powers Peak, though I haven't the foggiest idea why. Old Charles Harley, he couldn't have found a more difficult spot to stake his claim than 3,000 foot up the top of a mountain. Getting the men and equipment up that mountain and the ore back down to the mill site there was quite the chore. At first, it took some 7 hours and 30 mules to haul that 4,500 pounds of ore that came out of that mine each day down to the mill. And then of course, you had to return the mules back on. But then old Harley, he decided that he wanted himself a wire ropeway, an aerial tramway of sorts. Hired this fellow, I believe his name was Holiday or Halliday or something like that. Told him he wanted a wire ropeway just the way he provided those miners up on the American River back in 1856. The cable for that ropeway was 3/4 of an inch thick, 3 miles long in one continuous loop, and had 145 ore buckets attached to it. The full buckets of ore coming from the mine down to the mill provided the power to return the empty ones back top. Some of the men chose to ride those empty ore buckets up and down that mountain so they didn't have to do that climb. Well, let me tell you, you never would have caught me on that crazy gall-dang contraption. You take your life into your hands. And then it wasn't 3 years later that cable snapped. Sending buckets and cables careening down that mountain in a hail of sparks that looked like lightning in broad daylight. You could see it all the way back to Kernville. 2 men were cut to pieces by that flying cable when it broke. They closed that mine, of course, but I will tell you, I'm quite proud. I was on the shift that set off that last blast of powder deep down in that mine before they closed. Well, I did continue blacksmithing though. I opened me a blacksmith shop there in Kernville on Main Street, just opposite Andrew and Alice Brown's home. You know Alice. Alice Brown. Andrew is one of the most well-known merchants and citizens in our valley. He owns a store there in Kernville, and he owns one up in Havilah, and he has another store out on the South Fork in Weldon. That's where his ranch is. He also has himself a flour mill out there. He has himself a lumber mill up on the Greenhorn Hill. He's quite the merchant, and quite the civic leader also. Well, my shop's just right opposite his house on Main Street. Of course, I do blacksmithing for the ranchers and the miners and the merchants of the valley. Make brands for the ranchers. This here is my brand. You can see the T and the J and the G. Marie and I at the time were living down on Green Street there, next to the river, just north of where the weir is for that power canal they built. By that time we had our second child, another beautiful little girl. Her name, we named her, what did we name her? We named her Bim is what we named her actually. Technically her name is Irene, but we call her Bim. She was a hard-working little thing just like her mama. Well, I also owned a reception saloon for a time there in Kernville at the corner of Main and Nellie Dent Streets. Also had me a bottle shop, a bottle shop? Also had me a hotel up at the north end of town, though I lost that to the fire. Our Stella, she became good friends with Andrew Brown's daughter, Mary Elizabeth. They call her Bessie. Well, let me tell you, Bessie and Stella, they are just the best of friends. They have spent hours together reading books to each other and making up and telling stories and yipping about this and yapping about that and riding their horses and roaming the countryside. They have become just like two peas in a pod. Well, I believe it was about 1906 that I leased the Frank Thurston Ranch there on the east side of the river, just north of the Sumner Range. And then 5 years later, I purchased the adjoining land, and we just now all call it the River Nook Ranch. I have beef cattle on the pastures. That hard-working woman of mine, she has herself a dairy. She calls it the River Nook Dairy. Produces some of the finest milk and cream in the valley. Our grandson Bob, that's Irene's boy. He'll haul some of that butter that she makes up to the Edison camps there on the North Fork. Marie also has herself some honeybees. And I mean a whole herd of honeybees. People got to calling her the bee queen of the KRV. Those little buzzing workers of hers produce thousands of pounds of honey each year, and she'll stick it in jars like this, and then she'll slap a label on it, and then we'll truck it all up to the railhead there in Caliente, and then send it off down to the markets to sell. Well, I can see I probably talked too much. Let you folks mosey on, but I appreciate you all stopping by. You have a pleasant day now. Well, if you'll just let me... Whoa, what's happening? Let's hear it. Microphone. I think that's it. Let's try if that works. Too close. I need to put my glasses on so I can see who I'm talking to. All right. Well, I promised Linda that I would introduce myself to you because she didn't get to. So I'll do that. My name's Gene Verbate, and that's still a little bit too loud. My name's Gene Verbate, and I've lived in the Valley for close to 40 years. I did my graduate and undergraduate work at UC Davis, and then started teaching. I worked as a naturalist for the outdoor school for Fresno County, kind of like Camp Keep, for a few years. Then I got a job assistant headmaster at a private boys' school with Mr. Best there, and we both decided after 1 year that was a mistake. And so I was then hired as the administrator and director of outdoor education for Stanislaus County's outdoor school in Sonora also, and did that for a number of years. And then came down here, and Larry Holocaust, I know you all know a lot of you know him. He hired me as a teacher, and I taught at Wallace School for a number of years, and then decided that this living history stuff that I'm doing now was pretty cool. So I started my own business, portraying Revolutionary War and colonial soldiers all over California. And then in 1995, I made the best decision I've ever made in my life. I proposed, and my wife accepted, and we got married in 1995. Best decision I ever made. We did that for almost 20 years, traveling around the state, and then when I retired from that, my Larry Holocaust and Rich Zimmerman and I started a photography business, opened a gallery here in Kernville, did that for 14 years. And then I went to a historical meeting and met this person. And she decided that she would be a good idea if I'd come to work for her over in the annex. I didn't say that was the best decision I've ever made, but it was a good decision. And now it's just an archivist over at the museum. Larry and I have written a couple of books in the process for the museum. One of the books, my Lord, this thing is already not working for some reason. Okay, one of the books was The Golden Trout Wilderness. It's for sale in our gift shop. And then just last year we published a book on the building of Isabella Dam. We just completed its third printing already in less than a year. So if you haven't got that book, you should look into it. And then Larry and I are in the process of writing our third book. Hopefully it'll be out by Whiskey Flat Days next year. It's called Faith, Family, and Forestry, the story about Bob Powers, cattleman and an accidental historian. And we'll have a complete biography of him and the woman he's married to we know as Bob's wife. Anyway, enough of that business. Let's talk about T.J. Gilbert and the rest of the story. I want to start by telling you that most of the information you're going to hear today came from a few sources. One of them is a book called Beneath the Lake. It was written by a woman by the name of Elizabeth Brady. And she is the granddaughter of Andrew Brown, was the granddaughter of Andrew Brown, she's not passed already, and the great-granddaughter of Judge Sumner. And she wrote this book in 1979 in association with our Historical Society. Fabulous book. It's been out of print for a number of years, and we just put it back into print a month or two ago. And so if you're interested, it's in the gift shop. It's a great book. The other book we used was North Fork Country by Bob Powers. You're probably all familiar with it. Talks a lot about the North Fork and Kernville and so forth. So again, it's available in the gift shop if you're interested. Before I go on, I want to encourage you to ask questions. You don't have to wait till the end. If you think of something you need to ask it, raise your hand and speak out, and I'll be glad to answer your questions as we go along. So let's start with Thomas Gilbert, the senior, TJ's father. We don't know a lot about him. We know that he was born June 15th of 1823. He was born in England. He had two sons, one of which was John Gilbert. We don't know who the other son was. We don't know who his wife was. We don't know who his daughters were. But that's about all we know about him. In Beneath the Lake, Elizabeth Brady says that he arrived with his he meaning TJ, arrived with his father Thomas, who was called Tussey, and he arrived in Kernville in 1871. So the question is, what's this Tussey about? Well, BBC America says the word tuss is a word with its roots in the old Cornish language, and it's thought to have some connection with male genitals. Male genitals. And then it goes on to say, if you're calling somebody a tuss, or in our case, Tussey, either the person you're addressing really doesn't like you, or they're so familiar and have good friendship with you that they're using it affectionately. So our question is, which is it? Well, we know from a few other things about Gilbert. One, from the Great Register in 1896, we know if you look down at the bottom, he is listed as a constable. So now, does that help us? Well, there are some people like constables and some people don't like constables. So that might not answer the question very well either. If we go to, I think it was blurry for me. 1900 is the census, 1900 census for Kernville. He was 77 years old, and you can see that he's listed there as a house member in the household of his son Thomas T.J. Gilbert. It's also, if you notice, who took this census, who was the census taker, it was J.C. Livingston, who happens to be the character that I portrayed last year in Tales on the Thread. So that was kind of cool. But his obituary, I don't know what newspaper it appeared in, but his obituary said that he was living with his son when he died. It has his birthday wrong, unfortunately. He was born June 15th, 1823. So he was not quite 92 there. And then it also says that he was living with I.J. Gilbert. That would be Irene. No, it's T.J. Gilbert, so they got that mixed up. Irene was his daughter, of course. But it also says at the bottom there that he was loved and respected. So maybe Tussie was a term of affection that people have called him. So at least that's the best that we can figure. T.J. is buried in the Kern Valley Cemetery in the old section. His grave is there. He was 93 years old when he died. He would have been 94 in June of 1917. That's about all we know about the fellow. So let's go on to Thomas John Gilbert. I'm going to call him TJ from now on. It just makes it easier. But he married Marie Renee, we know that. Here's what he looked like. This is one of the very few pictures we have of him. He's standing on Main Street with his horse. I'm guessing he's fairly young there. He's probably not married, but we really don't know. Elizabeth Brady says that he habitually wore a broad black hat and brought his horse dancing and prancing into town. And that's why you saw me walk in with a broad black hat. Plus, it's the only one I own. She also says in the book that he was a vain man, fond of telling people of his conquest with women, although some in his audience claim that they actually ran from him. But that's why I was telling you how good looking I was and all that type of stuff. You'll also notice that I used the term my lover. That was on a purpose also because the BBC says that the term my lover was an affectionate greeting that's unisex. Use it the way you might use dearie or you'll be fine, my lover. So it was just a common Cornish term. We know that T.J. and his father both worked at the Big Blue Mine. This is a photo of a thing we have in our mining exhibit in the museum. It's a payroll ledger for the Big Blue Mine in 1874. It's actually from the Sumner Mine before the Big Blue was consolidated with a bunch of mines. But so it was technically he was working at the Sumner Mine at the time. Of course, the Big Blue, if you're not familiar with it, this is a picture sort of. The Big Blue is sort of off to the picture to your left, where the Big Blue would be located up there. If you see the house there, sort of the top of the hill, you kind of see that house as you come up off the river before you come back down to the golf course. There, where you see the red arrow, sort of where Millville would be located. Millville was where the stamp mill was. They called it Millville. Sometimes they called it Milltown. It was also at a time called Burkeville, named for E.R. Burke, who was the manager of the Big Blue Mine at one time. So, same area all three times. And then the little other red arrow is kind of showing you where the mill used to be. Here's a closer picture of it. There's just a cement foundation there. That's where the red arrow is pointing. The blue is where the river is right now. In flood stage, I'm sure it comes much closer to where I stand and take the picture. It's private property now, and you can't get on unless you get permission. This is a photograph of Millville, and it shows on the left, that building on the left is the mill, the stamp mill. And in the middle of the picture is a building they called the White House. It was built by Colonel C. Strong. It was his house. He sold it eventually. But can you imagine living next door to an 80 stamp mill? It might have been the nicest house in the world, but I'm not sure it would be very pleasant to be living in that house. Also up in Millville, there was an adobe. I don't know if you can even see anything left of it, but it was built by Judge Sumner, and he lived in it. And after he sold it to a guy by the name of Mark Watt, and then Watt sold it to the Gilberts, TJ and his wife. So that's where they lived. And the picture in the upper right-hand corner there is the only picture I know of the mill. I haven't found, of the adobe. The woman in the white is Irene Gilbert. That's TJ's daughter. And the woman on the right is Mrs. Watt, the person that they bought the building from. The bottom left is the boarding house they had at Millville there for the miners. I said TJ also worked up at the Harley mine. Well, here's a picture of Powers Peak. They called it Mineral Mountain at the time. And then the green arrow is sort of showing you the main attic, the main entrance or to the mill. I gave you some false information. I told you, or TJ told you, that Charles Harley hired Halliday to build him this ropeway. That's not technically true. Halliday had a company, the Halliday Wire Company, and he built these tramways, these aerial tramways or ropeways all over the West. And so it wasn't actually Halliday coming up here building this thing. It was a guy by the name of Ambrose Blatchley who Harley hired, and he actually installed this thing or constructed it from the Halliday Rope Company. Blatchley actually, after completing this whole thing, wrote a letter to the Halliday Ropeway Company, and he said, "Your patent wire ropeway, which I recently erected at the Harley mine, works entirely satisfactorily, effecting a great savings in the cost of transporting ore from the mine to the mill and in sending lumber and supplies to the mine. The cost of transporting ore by pack train was $5 a ton. By your ropeway, it does not exceed 50 cents a ton. The length is 1.5 miles up. The upper end having an elevation of over 3,000 feet above the lower end. It crosses a high canyon at a height of over 300 feet from the surface of the ground with a single span of 750 feet. And altogether, the ground is among the roughest in the Sierra Nevada." And they actually put that, the Halliday Company actually put it in their catalog as a testimonial to this ropeway. This is a photograph of a ropeway. It is not our ropeway. This is not the Harley mine, but it gives you an idea of what they were constructing. This is a photograph of one of, yes?
What was the price of the wireway?
I don't know. I've never seen what it cost. I have no idea. And we don't know where he got the money to buy it. Maybe speculating on the gold he was going to take out. I haven't read that. This is one of the stanchions or the stations or whatever that survived the Harley mine, but John, I don't think it's there anymore, right?
No, they're all gone.
Yeah, they're all gone, but this was taken back probably in the 70s. They also had, if you look at their catalog, this is a photograph from the wire rope catalog from Halliday, and it shows how you might get miners up and down that tramway. Though I have seen photographs of a guy just standing in the ore cart holding on to the thing. And then if you look in the Rainbow News, it's kind of one of the first newspapers, magazines that was published in the Valley by Ken Wortley. And in the October 1955, he had a story about the Harley mine. And Wortley said that a person by the name of George Silvera, who Wortley knew, he was a manager, or excuse me, foreman at the operator mine in Johannesburg, over there by Randsburg. He said that Silvera told him that he had ridden a ore bucket on the Harley mine tramway from the mine down to the mill, and about halfway down there was a problem and he was left stranded for 2 hours hanging in this thing. Either way, if you think about it, it would have been a rather harrowing experience going up this thing. And then it's not like the gondola at Disneyland. You know, this is stopping every so often and then dumping ore and then going again. So it would take you a while to get up and down that mountain if they were hauling ore at the same time. If you want more information than what I'm going to give you on the Harley mine, you can just come on over to the annex. Tim Kelly, he's the Forest Service archaeologist for us here on the Sequoia. He wrote his dissertation on the Harley mine and comparing that to another mine up in Mono County called the May Lundy mine. And his entire dissertation is there. We actually have all the documentation for his dissertation. And then in January of 2020, he did a history talk for us that we have on videotape that you can listen to. More information you'd ever want to know. And I wish he was here today so I could convince him to write a book about it, because he would make a great book. Anyway, so that's the Harley mine. Well, we know that TJ had a blacksmith shop in Kernville, and here's a picture of it. It's on the left. The A. Brown store's there. The Christian Saloon probably became the reception saloon. It's in the exact same location. The white picket fence there, or the little picket fence you see, would be Andrew Brown's house, which was set back off the road a little bit. If you go out to the front of the museum and look past the annex over in the empty field, there's a house right there. It's at 130 Tobias Street. And that was built in 1910 by TJ and his wife Marie. If you look here on this map of Old Kernville, you can see that Main Street's in red. I got the main red, north and south. The blue one is Nellie Dent. It's going east-west, and in the green is the College Street up there. We're at the end of College Street, the west end of College Street was the church. And then the red arrow is pointing where the house on Tobias was located at Old Kernville, almost at the corner of College or Smith and Main Street. And the brown arrow is where his blacksmith shop was located. And the blue arrow down at the bottom is where he lived when he was living on Green Street when his second child was born. This house, again, was built in 1910 by TJ and Marie.
Some questions here.
Oh, question, yes.
Gene, can you expand on how a street in Kernville, Old Kernville, got named College Street?
I have absolutely no idea. We've been talking to Rick Hubach. I think it would be a great book or a series of things in the saddlebag for all these names. And we have, there's names all over this valley that have a reason for being called that. And we're hoping that he'll do the research to do that. Well, TJ and Marie built this house, and then they rented it out to Joseph and Mary Green. It actually became the telephone, the house for the telephone service. There was only two telephone lines, but that's where it was. And then when the Gilberts died, Stella, their oldest daughter, inherited it from her parents, and she used it as a rental. So you think Airbnbs are old, new-fashioned? No. And then, but it was, Stella had it in Old Kernville still, and she rented it there. Then when the lake came, it was moved to Kernville by Stella, and then she rented it again. And then when she passed, her son Clyde inherited it from Stella, and then he sold it to his uncle-in-law, John Diltz, who was Irene's first husband. And then when he passed, he left it to his daughter, Carol Luthi, and I assume she rented it, I'm not sure, and who owns it now? We have to go knock on the door, but it doesn't look like anybody's there right now. What's that?
I think Danny Wagner owns it.
Oh, he does?
I think so.
Okay. Well, we talk and see if they'll let us get in, see if there's any cool stuff in Hello. Oh, not too far. There we go. Over in the annex, we have some really cool maps. One of them is this one. Actually, Bob Mahan gave us this one. It's a cool map. It was made in 1903. It was produced by the Kern County Land Company, most likely in pursuit of water rights on the Kern, is our best guess. The Kern County Land Company was started by Lloyd Tevis and James Van L. Hagen in 1890. And I have that map here on the table. When you're done, if you'd like to come look at it, I've got it marked up for you. You can see it. It's a very, very cool map. If we zoom in a little bit on that map, because it's way too small there, we can see that the old town of Kernville is in red. Oh, went the wrong way. Wrong way, there we go. We can see that old Kernville there is circled in red, the old town of Kernville, and then in fuchsia is the old Sumner Ranch. By the time TJ got over there, Sumner, I believe, was dead by that time. 1904 he died, Charlie? That sounds about right. And then in the blue square up there is a section of land, and it just says Thomas Gilbert on it. And so at first we just assumed that Thomas Gilbert was Thomas Gilbert Sr. We didn't know. But then Bob Mahan provided me with a lawsuit. And we've scanned it here for you. It was 1904. And the lawsuit was, the plaintiffs were Miller and Lux and the Kern County Land Company. And then there are, what is it, 13, I think it is, 13 other canal companies in the San Joaquin Valley, all suing everybody that lived on the Kern River. And one of them was, well, of course, one of them here is Andrew Brown, and here is Judge Sumner, but in green is T.J. Gilbert. So more than likely, that land that we just showed you up here is probably Thomas Gilbert, wasn't his father then. So that's our guess at least. And that lawsuit's interesting. We're not quite sure exactly why it was happening, other than in 1888, if you read our book on the Kern River, it talks about the big lawsuit between Hagen and Miller and Lux and the Kern County Land Company. They had this huge suit, and right before they were trying to decide who gets water rights down there, and then they realized when it went to the Supreme Court, we better just settle it. So they settled it. The court never made a distinction, never had to rule on that. But that was in 1888. This is lawsuit was 1904. So they've already figured out who gets the water down there. Now they want to make sure that nobody up here gets the water. And so they have sued all sorts of people there. They actually had, I forget, it was like 19 John Does. They listed all these people, and then at the end they said John Doe, John Doe, John Doe. So they were just suing everybody. What the result of this, we do not yet know, but we will at some time. If we go a little, let's see. So we go, here's a little further up the map, and so you can see now down at the bottom we got the Sumner Ranch and TJ's land, and then we have what he leased from the Thurston Ranch, Frank Thurston's. He did not really probably lease it from Frank Thurston because Bob has homestead records of Thurston's actual homestead application for that land. And then we also have records of Thurston selling it to, and I'm going to say Curlis. Does that sound right, Bob? Curlis? Start with a C. I can't remember the name now. But so TJ's not leasing it from Thurston, and we're not quite sure how J.B. Roberts gets involved in this. J.B. Roberts was one of the first people on the South Fork. He was on the South Fork. He owned land here too, so we still got a lot more research to do to figure out who owned all this land and whatnot. The red arrow points to the southeast corner of that piece of property, that TJ and the Thurston Ranch and so forth. That's as far south as it came. Then if we go to 1924, we have another map in the annex over there, a 1924 map, and it shows Gilbert's land still, but adding on the land that he purchased. So that would be the entire River Nook Ranch that he had. They have Gilbert there. He called it the River Nook Ranch. And then in fuchsia, you can see the old Burlando Apalatea land, and the arrow's pointing to just about where you're sitting right now. So that gives you an idea of how much land that Gilbert owned at one time. He called it the River Nook Ranch, and, there you go. This is a sign telling people to stay off leave his gates and waterworks alone. And you can see he calls it the River Nook Ranch, and you can see down here at the bottom, a little bit cut off, but that's his, oops, keep pushing the wrong button. This is his brand right there, T.J. Gilbert brand. We do have one thing that Bob has loaned us. We have T.J. Gilbert's 1906 Winchester 12-gauge shotgun. Wow. Very cool. And it was T.J.'s, and it's a shotgun in great condition. What's interesting is right here, he's made notches. There are 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, he was a constable. We doubt that he was shooting people. And Bob says, probably not shooting quail, because he would have shot way more quail than that. But maybe a deer, we don't know. But anyway, you're free to come look at that when I'm all done. So if we zero in on the map a little bit more, here's the original Gilbert Thurston Ranch that they loaned. The Kern River here is coming down, so this line here is the Kern River, and the main Kern River at this time was going here and then made a little crook. That's the Nook, and that's where River Nook Ranch comes from. Now the main channel is this where the purple arrow shows. The main channel, there's still water here, but this is the main channel right there. They have a ditch. It still exists today. They're going to put water in it on April 1st, I hear. This is some historic pictures of that ditch. This down here on the bottom is where they have a little swim hole where they go in and swim in the ditch and so forth. It started up by the hatchery or past the hatchery, north of the hatchery originally. When the hatchery goes out of business, they had to bypass the hatchery, and the ditch now starts below the hatchery and runs all the way down to, and it ends, right now it ends at that southeast corner that I pointed to you. Traditionally, it was called the Thurston Ditch, and it went way past the Sumner Ranch. And if you look on this map, you can see where it starts and where it ends. I like these pictures. It shows you how lush everything was back in those days. I told you that Marie had a dairy, the River Nook Dairy. Eventually, Irene took it over and ran it, and then she sold it to the Goblers, and it became the Mountain Meadows Dairy. Here, just on the back wall of our museum, we have this picture, this big sign from the Goblers. We have in our museum this device. This took these little, cardboard pout things and put them on the top of the bottles. That's how they would bottle the water, milk, excuse me. And we also in our museum, this is one of the River Nook Dairy bottles that we have. Very cool. We also have her butter churn. Very heavy duty butter churn. Of course, a butter paddle. And then the churn, actually, we think the part of the churn that's doing the churning was not there. This is actually a butter stamp, because people in those days would make a big block and then you put some beautiful little indentation in the butter, a stamp, just so it would sell better. And so that's probably their butter stamp and not part of the churn.
Just for safety's sake, don't pick it up by the hand.
This?
No.
Oh, this?
Yes.
Good idea.
They're prone to break.
Okay. It's heavy too, very, very, very heavy. Okay. So we also said that Marie was the bee queen of the Kern River Valley. I think that's some of her hives right there on the river now. That's the only picture that I've come up with, but they look like pretty small hives, but hives nonetheless. Bob Powers in his North Fork country, he says that she was called the bee queen of the Kern River Valley. And the label that we have on this jar is actually a copy of her label. We have the actual labels in the museum, in the annex. But in order to put it on this jar, I had to scan it and then shrink it a little bit. It was a bigger label. So this is probably not the size jar or ceramic crock that she was selling it in. She was probably selling it in larger quantity because the label was larger than this. But that is exactly what her labels look like. And then in North Fork, Bob says that at the highest point of her career as a beekeeper came in 1916 when she brought in a crop of 21 tons of honey. I'm sorry, Bob. I'm not sure if that's correct. I did some research, and a modern day hive, the ones we have today, you know, the big ones, produce, if it's a really good producing hive, will produce 1,400, will produce 30 pounds. To produce 30 pounds a year, it takes 1,400 hives. And if you're going to produce 60 pounds a year, it takes 700 hives. And 21 tons is 42,000 pounds of honey. So do the math. I don't know if she could have possibly had enough hives to produce that much honey. But that's what Bob says. But you have to also remember, we have other maps in the annex that show that North Fork back in the early 1900s when Sumner was going, there were just acres and acres of orchards. And so lots of pollinating bees were needed and would be producing a lot of honey. But for my sense, 21 tons is a heck of a lot of honey. Now maybe she shipped that much, but maybe it took her 3 years to produce it. Who knows?
It's all tax purposes.
Exactly. Anyway, so that's TJ and Marie. They are buried in Union Cemetery in Bakersfield. That's their graves right there. She was 68 and he was 87 years old when they died. They had 2 children, we said. One of them was Estelle, or they called her Stella, and she married a guy by the name of Lucien Barbeau. We have a lot of pictures of Stella. This one on the left is from May 1891. It's a school pageant from Kernville. She was 10 years old at the time and she was in this little pageant. And then in the right there, that's Bessie Brown, her best friend, and the little doll is called Flossie. Here's a picture. I showed you this picture before, but the red arrow is pointing out Stella sitting on the boarding house there up in Millville. I love this picture. This is Bessie and Stella, you know, probably as teenagers, and they're riding their horses, but notice they're riding side saddles. They are side saddles, so that's interesting. But they talk a lot about, because Elizabeth Brady was a Brown, she talks a lot about how good friends Stella and Bessie were and the things that Mrs. Brown did for them. There's a ton of information in the book about those 2. Here's a picture of the 2 sisters. And Irene's the one on the left. Stella's on the right. I'm guessing it was taken looking at the age, probably 1904, 1905 in that neck of the woods, I would guess. Not quite sure. And then here's a Stella with another really good friend of hers, Flossie Stavert. There's a lot in the book about the Stavert family also. And this is when Stella was 11 years old. We also have pictures of these 2 as fully grown adults, and they were still friends when they were adults. Here they are at some type of works, don't know what, but the arrow shows Stella, and this is after she was married, when she was married to Lucien. Those 2 are buried in Union Cemetery also. This is their grave. Lucien died at 59 years of age, and Stella died at 79 years of age. The other daughter was Irene. She was married twice. First she married John Diltz, and her 2 children were fathered by John Diltz. Then they divorced, and then she married Art Galley. This is a picture of Irene later in life. If you come over to the annex, we have digitized all of Bob Power's interviews, or as many as we could, that he used when he wrote his 9 books. And we have Irene's interview digitized that you can listen to. I was in junior high school. No, I was in high school when he did that interview. So it was quite a while ago, 1968. But Irene seems to be quite the businesswoman. Besides her dairy and her bee business, her son Bob also told us that she started the bulk sales of gasoline and oil up here. And by 1956, we found ads that James Witt now had owned it by 1956, so it would have been prior to that. But he says that's one thing that his mom did. Once she married Art Daly, then they were involved in a number of things. These are some ads that appeared in the Rainbow News from Ken Wortley's publication. And you can see in 1954 in May, Art Daly, Irene's husband, had a malt shop, and then the next month they changed the name to the River Nook Malt Shop, and then a year later it was the River Nook Cafe, still Art Daly, and then apparently a few years later we're guessing that he sold it because it's the Mickeys and it says come meet the Mickeys, and so probably it was sold to whoever the Mickeys were. The next one's even more interesting to me because we found ads for Camp Gilbert. And the one in 1956 says that it's the first camp north of camp of James Store in Kernville. And so is that James Campground, or was James and River Nook all one together? Because River Nook is the name the Dalys used. We need to do some more research to see exactly what the connection there is. But more than likely, the Gilberts were involved in starting that campground up there, or involved in it somehow. We need to do some more research on that one. All 3 of the people, the Diltses and Dalys, they're all buried in the Kern Valley Cemetery. John Dilts died at 75, Art Daly died at 86, and Irene, hard-working Irene, made it till 95. Both of the girls had 2 children, and those children for Stella were Ronald and Clyde. Don't have a lot of information about Ronald and Clyde. I have a picture of them here. There's Clyde on the left and Ronald in the middle, and then Lucian, the father, is sort of hiding back there. It's the only picture I've ever found of him. Carol Luthi, on the other hand, there's a picture of Bob and Carol Luthi. Bob Luthi was quite the photographer. He worked with Artist Walker and published a book or 2 with artists, and artists loved doing the photography for the books. And then we have in our digital archive bunches and bunches of pictures. Most of them are undated, unnamed. They're pictures, but we don't know what we're looking at. So if you know anybody that knows the Luthys, we'd love them to come in and maybe we can identify more of these pictures that we have.
How'd you put the name of that picture?
That was actually on one of the ones that
Was
was
that in the Luthi pictures?
Yes,
Okay.
in that file that was all the Luthi stuff.
Just a handful of them.
Yeah, a few of them, yeah, very few of them are labeled, but one of them was. We have no pictures of Bob Dilts that I know of. We don't, Carol though, I found in 1957 an article written by Carol in the Rainbow News. And I don't know if that's a one-off or if she wrote more articles. I haven't found any more, but she might have been an author. They lived in the valley their entire life. Bob Dilts is buried in Burbank, in the cemetery down there, but the Luthys are both buried in the Kern Valley Cemetery. Carol died at 85 and Bob died at 88 years of age. So, that's the rest of the story, except, first of all, I have to extremely thank Bob Mahon. He has all this information. Bob, very generously giving us a lot of this information, and Bob actually owns he purchased the last little bit of the River Nook Ranch, the very southern portion, 2 acres, was it?
Yeah, 2.5 acres.
2.5 acres. Everything else has been sold off, the big Tony Click owns a part of it. There's, it's all been divided out. It was all divided over the years. And the last section Bob Dilt sold was to Bob and Marilyn. So we really appreciate that, Bob.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, before you leave, if you haven't been so, I highly recommend you go into the museum and check out our natural history exhibit. It just opened a week or 2 ago. Those people that worked on it did a fabulous job. So go, please take a look at that if you haven't seen it. It's awesome. And then while you're looking at that, I recommend that you take a look at the art wall. This month, Pete Wingender, he's the guy that's lived in the valley forever. And he's 95, confined to a wheelchair now, but he draws color pencil drawings. They're for sale, and he's very nice, because if you buy something, 100% of the sale comes to the museum. They're not taking any of it. And so if you do that. And then the last thing I have to say is, if you ever want to go down to Bakersfield and check out the Gilbert's grave, you never know who you're going to see.